We're so honored today to have several of the leaders of the legislature here to join us to talk about key outcomes of the session and what the impacts will be to Utahns over the coming year. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge our partner, the Deseret News, who's helping to co-sponsor this event. I also want to acknowledge Interim Dean Rachel Hayes, who is the Dean of the David Eccles School of Business. Raise your hand, Rachel, if you would. Welcome, nice to have you here. We will have, joining us, they're being mic'd up right now, but 4 legislative leaders. And real quickly, I want to remind you who we have. We have Speaker Brad Wilson, who represents Utah's 15th District. Mr. Wilson was elected to the House in 2010. He's the president and CEO of Destination Homes, a residential home builder in Utah, although that may have changed recently. President Stuart Adams represents District 22. He's a partner in the Adams Company, a real estate construction and development firm in Kaysville. Before being elected to the Senate, President Adams served 4.5 years in the Utah House of Representatives and 9 years on the Layton City Council. Representative Brian King is the Democratic member of the Utah House of Representatives representing District 28. He's a self-employed lawyer providing legal services in the field of ERISA and something to do with MHPAEA, which I don't really know what that is, but it sounds great. Senator Gene Davis joins us. Senator Davis is a Democratic member of the Utah Senate representing the 3rd District since 1999. He served in the House before that, and professionally he works in public relations and advertising. Welcome, Senator Davis. Great to have you with us. Let's give them a hand. And again, we're joined by over 200 folks on our Zoom call. So with this, I will turn the time over to Doug Wilks, the executive editor of the Deseret News, who will moderate today's panel. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. On behalf of the Deseret News, I'd also like to recognize Holly Richardson, editor of Utah Policy. She and I worked with the Kempsey Gardner Center to put this together, and especially to our guests who have come off a rousing session, had to figure out where to put $25 billion. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Right off the top, I want to just ask a simple question. What do you think the legislature did right, and where did it fall short? And maybe we can start with Speaker Wilson, and I'll have each of you respond to that quickly. What you did right and what you wish maybe could have happened a little differently.
Well, good morning, Doug. Is this on? Can you hear me okay? This is above my pay grade to figure out technology. So,
he's working on it.
Well, I'll get started and I'll just speak loudly. So it's great to be with you, Doug. Thanks for the invite today, Natalie. Thanks for hosting us again. And I don't want to start out with correcting you, but we actually were $26 billion. So there was another billion that we found at the last minute.
Was that the infrastructure that you put to?
We did, and that's one of the things that I think we did right.
Okay.
Infrastructure. I know what not to compete with. Let me just start by saying we entered this session recognizing that this was going to be a session unlike any other. And let me just mention the money part first, because it was really an issue that sort of was present throughout the whole session. And we went into the session with over $3 billion of new money or additional money that we didn't have a year ago, and had to figure out what to do with that. But the thing that we all understood very, very well was that $3+ billion is money that is being borrowed from our kids and our grandkids. It's money that was sent to us from Washington, D.C., over $1 billion worth of ARPA funds, plus a whole bunch of new money that came in because of stimulus that was sent into the economy, creating this massive amount of money for state lawmakers to figure out what to do with. And we went into the session saying our objective is with this money, because it's really not ours, it's our kids and grandkids, let's make generational investments that they will benefit from. And so that's how we thought about the state budget primarily. And so over $1 billion, about $1.3 billion of that money went into infrastructure investments that will help make life better in 5 or 10 years when those infrastructure investments are put in place. But there were some other things that we did that I think were generational as well. Let's talk about water. We all know, it's so funny, everywhere, funny in kind of a sad way, everywhere I go, the first thing everyone wants to talk about now, water. I think 3 people came up to me just this morning and mentioned water, and they're concerned about it. And lawmakers are very concerned about it as well. And so there were 2 big things we did relative to conservation. One was secondary water metering, and we think that will reduce water consumption by 20 to 30%. And we also put about $50 million into the agriculture space so they can optimize their water use and use less water that way. I could go on and on about things I think we did well.
We'll give you another minute.
The closing bell is too recent, Doug, to think about anything that we didn't get done, because it feels like
I got
we
a
did
few
everything
things on my
possible.
list, so we'll be okay.
But I'm sure you've got some ideas. So I don't want to take time away from others, but I could keep going.
Thank you. President Adams?
Again, thank you for having us here, Doug and Natalie. A great opportunity. The session, it's hard to think of anything we did wrong, because we did so much that is right. And we all get to speak together a lot, Speaker and I, and rather than repeat the things that he just talked about, I mean, we're pretty much unified. Education, 6% WPU, 9% overall funding for education, infrastructure, billions of dollars, recreation, things that the Speaker championed, water. I want to take it back. Yes, what we did right. Let's go back 2 years ago. 2 years ago today, we kind of shut down the economy. We were all in our homes wondering if we were our lives were going to change. We had no idea what we were going to provide. We had no idea what the virus was going to do. We had no idea whether our businesses would live or not. And we came together as a legislature, and the Speaker and I did something we've never done before. Never been done in the history of Utah before. We called ourselves a special session. We formed a legislative committee, and even after it's mentioned in the department. But one of the things that we recommended was that we wanted to back up our economy, and we have opened up non-emergency medical care. We've seen people die from non-attended to medical care. People are having appendicitis, staying at home, and rupturing their appendix rather than going and getting care. It was a mess of what we were doing. May 1 of 2020, we opened back up non-emergency medical care and opened up our businesses. Now, fast forward, at that point in time, we had no idea what our future might be. Fast forward to today, we focused on lives, saving lives. We have a very low case fatality rate with COVID. We focused on saving livelihoods. We focused on taking care of our school kids. And we focused on individual liberties. Today, the biggest budget in the history of the state, record funded education, $1 billion going into infrastructure, money going into recreation. What do we do wrong? Well, we might have done some things wrong during the session, and we can go back and retweak. But Utah has the best economy in the nation. We had the fastest growing GDP. We have some housing affordability issues, but we've done, I think, a ton right. And it's a session, and not only a session, but it's a 2-year period of time that has been extremely difficult for us. I would never want to go back through that, but I think we haven't done it all right, but I think we've done a ton right.
Thank you. Representative King.
Well, thank you. I think we've done some good things in addition to what the Speaker and the President referenced. I like the idea that we put significant money into affordable housing, tens of millions of dollars. We made some progress on that, as the President indicated. We have a lot of work to do there. We have some problems there, and so I was happy to see us move forward in a positive direction there. I was happy to see us move forward in a positive direction on affordable, or rather, all-day kindergarten. There's a good news, bad news story there. We, at one point, were being asked by the governor and others to fund it at $40 million. We ended up funding it at significantly higher levels, but $12 million. We're a little schizophrenic at the Utah State Legislature on education funding. As the President said, we have significant increases for WPU and for other funding. We've done that continually in the last couple of years. Credit to the legislature for that. One of the things, though, that is a problem on a longer trajectory, over the last 25 years, we have consistently and intentionally diverted funds from our income tax revenue for other uses. And we saw it in 1996, beginning with the dilution of K through 12 education funding by adding higher education in there. We saw it again with Amendment G when we opened up the income tax funds for use for children and people with disabilities. We saw it in 2018 when we reduced our income tax rate from 5.0 to 4.95. We saw it again this year when we reduced our income tax rates further from 4.95 to 4.85. Now you can make arguments either way on that, but the impact of that is to reduce available funding for K through 12 and through higher education. And that's something that is concerning to me in light of the fact that we still are near the bottom, if not at the bottom, in per pupil education spending. That's not the end all and be all. I wouldn't really care about that if our achievement rates, if our performance rates for students was at the top of the pack instead of in the middle of the pack, but in fact, we're at the bottom of the pack in terms of how we fund. We're in the middle of the pack in terms of how our students perform, and we need to and must do better. And some of the things that we do up at the legislature are inconsistent with that goal, that worthy ideal that, from my perspective, is the greatest investment we can make in the state.
Thank you. Senator Davis.
Thank you. I think probably the one thing we did was we followed the Constitution and one it. We balanced the budget, which was a mandate to us by the people previously. And so we did keep that goal in mind. We had a lot of money, probably more money than I've ever seen in excess in my entire political career. It's very, very tough when you're short. When you got a lot of money, and I mean a lot of money to be able to expend, it really becomes everybody at the trough trying to grab their mouthful of state monies to be able to move forward. We did a lot of things this year in trying to rehabilitate the state, build infrastructure, get all of that taken care of. I think in public education we failed. We could have done more, and we should do more. Wages of the state employees and wages in the state are lagging. We're seeing reports now that we could end up with what's going on in the world, with stagflation coming into, and that's going to hurt those who we haven't taken care of in the public realm. When I take a look at state employees' wages, they're way, way below. I mean, there's employees that are making $10, $11 an hour and doing professional jobs, and they're held down. We heard from trying to get engineers, trying to get veterinarians, trying to get people working in the state of Utah that there's a lack of funds to be able to pay them at market rates or even slightly below. I think that was one of the tragedies that went on. Public education, we talk about the great percentage increase that we had in our WPU, but 1% of that taken away by another bill that we did in taking care of the fees, school fees, comes out of the WPU, which is about 1%. So that lowers that. We need to do better on education. We're losing teachers because we're not adequately compensating teachers. And so we need to take a look at all of these things in the future. And we know most of this money that we spent was one time. And so we need to be frugal with where we're spending our ongoing money and make sure that it gets into the pockets that help stimulate the economy even further in wage growth.
Thank you so much. Let's move on. There's a long list of the things that you did, and so we're going to only barely touch a little bit. I'd like you to respond to a principle, however. Legislative control versus local control. So in the first week of the session, both the House and the Senate, you had the power to trump state and local COVID-19 restrictions, and you passed a joint resolution to terminate the mask mandates in Salt Lake and Summit counties. Those leaders were following the advice of health officials. Later in the session, there was great debate about education, requirements for teachers, mask mandates in schools, all those things. So could each of you respond, do you believe in local control over state control? We often talk about that in terms of the federal government and the state government, but the reaction we get at the Deseret News and elsewhere is, wow, this is a contradiction. Why are they doing that? Maybe we could start with President Adams.
Thank you. And a lot of it's just understanding. A former city councilman, served 9 years on the city council. I believe city councils do a great job. But you take the mask mandate, for example. Senator Vickers led that piece of legislation as we talked about executive powers, and put on the committee that he put together, the commission, had minority members and we had majority members. We had the league there. We had the Association of Counties, and they came up with a process. And the process was simply this: that an executive, which our founding fathers said that the people who ought to make the laws are the legislative powers, either the city councils or the legislatures, and the executive ought to carry them out. But if an executive feels impressed that he needs to set policy, or she needs to set policy, that the legislative branch should have the first right to review and override that. And then because those counties and cities received their authorization for their power from the legislature, that the appeal wouldn't go to a court of appeals, but would come back to the legislature for an appeal. And everybody agreed that that was the process. So specifically Salt Lake County, the mayor put in the mandate. The city council, I think, actually overrode it. Then they didn't. Then they came back and rescinded their override. But the appeal was to the legislature. So statutorily, we were the appeal body. So we either had to be complicit and allow the mandate to stay in place, or we had to act and repeal it. It wasn't a matter of local control. It was a matter of following our statute. And many times, I know you try to report right, and everybody tries to get it, the press reported right, but that was not an effort of overriding. It was a matter of just following the statute. And many times as a council, we look, and we've had a great partnership with the Association of Counties. My best friends are on the League of Cities and Towns, the executive directors. We've had a good relationship, but I think there is a dynamic, and as long as we have counties and cities and states, we will have that ability to manage and try to work with one another. I see it a little bit of the local control, but I actually see it as a partnership working together. And those that I have that are friends of mine, I think they'd be here and basically say that we work together great. But that was a matter of just following the statute.
Representative King, do you agree with that?
I think that President Adams has a point when you're talking about the masking issue, but I think that your point is actually true in the sense that there are a number of other examples that you can identify where the state legislature overrode or restricted the ability of subdivisions of the state to, whether it's cities or counties or townships, to act in the way that they felt is necessary. For example, we limited the ability of Salt Lake County to put in place a requirement for background checks at gun shows. We also limited the ability of Moab City and Grand County to regulate ATVs. So the thing that comes to mind when you ask that question, the thing that comes to my mind, Doug, is this is the natural fruit of having a very powerful legislature that has supermajority control by one party. I think that whenever you have those kind of concentrations of power, you're more likely to move in the direction of having exercises of those powers that are at times beyond what they should be. I've had more than one Speaker of the House tell me they wish that we had more members of the minority party in the House. Not this Speaker, let me be clear. But more than one of our past speakers have said, what we need up here is more Democrats. And they said it in a private conversation. But I think that's telling and important. We have better product come out as a matter of policy and legislation when we have a more robust and even playing field in terms of the kind of discussion that we have.
Mm-hmm. Speaker Wilson, your thoughts on this issue?
Oh, I'm so glad you called on me after Representative King. So,
got to keep it lively.
I think that you asked, your question was around the principle, and let me just...
The principle of local versus state.
Local control versus state control. And you mentioned, and there have been a few other mentions of issues that came up during the session where those things were talked about. But I could sit down with you and show you 50 to 100 bills where we balance local control in a way that the locals were happy with it. And so that's kind of the way the legislative process works. And there are times, though, and I would probably put them into two categories, where the principle of local control that's delegated to the local governments by the legislature. It is different than the federal government. In our state constitution, the legislature delegates certain responsibilities to local government. There are times when the legislature says there's a statewide interest that needs to be thought of here, and so we'll move into that space. There's also times where there's maybe a striking situation where the legislature says maybe something here is just not working the right way, and we're going to have the legislature move in and weigh in on this issue. But those are the exception, not the rule. I think you'll find the legislature, again, the vast majority of the time prefers to have local leaders make decisions at a local level because that's where they're made the best. But there are times when we do, as a state legislature, move into those spaces, and we've talked about some of those already. So,
Senator Davis, let you respond, and then I'll have one follow-up.
You know, one of the interesting things is over the last few years, the one thing I have noticed is the legislature moving in with more and more power and control over local government, over county governments. And I think one of the big tragedies that we've seen with this COVID outbreak and this pandemic that we've been going through is an erosion of our public health system, which has served us very, very well since the early part of the last century in this country. Has helped keep health and the welfare of the people moving forward, helping to find vaccines and solutions to healthcare problems. And one of the things that we have done in the last 18 months is really destroyed, in many ways, the public's trust in the institution of public health and what it means. I think that's one of the tragedies that we're seeing here by taking control away from those who understand what the problems are on the local level. We also have attacked our public education system by trying to continually move into the classroom to dictate what's going on in the classroom instead of having free, open children really learning how to learn. We want to get in there and tell them what to learn. And I think that's very, very dangerous to the future because the growth in America, in our state, through our public education system has truly been teaching young people how to think, how to get along with one another, and how to move forward so that we can continue to grow as a community, as a state, and as a nation.
Thank you. Speaker Wilson, can I just follow on one thing on this and then we'll move on?
You bet.
But when you talk about a statewide interest, I believe House Bill 182 closed the legal loophole that allowed Salt Lake City Mayor Mendenhall to issue the mask mandate. The first week of the session, you were pinpointing legislation that would stop Summit County and Salt Lake County. But those are the local health officials that said, this is best for us. Salt Lake, people live in apartments. They're walking up and down. A mask makes sense where it might not in southern Utah. How is it a statewide interest for the legislature to come forward and say, no, we're going to change this?
Yeah, so that bill actually, it wasn't really a loophole, at least from our perspective. That was related to a bill that we passed about a year prior. And we're just trying to provide clarity around that process. But I get your point, Doug. And I think all of us are looking forward to someday soon, hopefully turning the page on COVID. Vaccine mandates, mask mandates, all those things have been very, very divisive. And there were reasons why the legislature felt like that made sense. There are other competing interests when we talk about those things, the economy, for example, and the fact that we were getting information from other health officials that the Omicron variant was not being helped by masks. And so you take all those things together when we think about those things, and that was part of that decision matrix.
Okay.
And maybe I just jump in, and I hope I was, I may not have been very clear that when Senator Vickers put that legislation the Speaker referenced to a year or two before it together, the League and the Association of Counties clearly said they wanted the legislature to be the appellant body. And when they made us the appellant body, it wasn't a matter of us overturning local control. Their constituents came to us as the appellant body, and then we had to make a decision. And of course, you know that if the appellant body says no, they're complicit and they agree with what what has happened. And we had to make a determination whether we said no or yes. And we put ourselves in that position. And it wasn't that we put ourselves there, but we had the minority party, the majority party in the legislature, the League and the cities of towns putting together that statutory structure that put us in that position. It appeared that we were overriding local control, but it was we were following the statute that had been put together by the League and the counties' support. And they wanted that to happen. So that particular instance was not very well understood, and it probably still isn't very well understood. And so it was a matter of us being an appellant body. And quite frankly, I thought it was a divisive issue. I didn't want it to move through the session. We did it opening day because I wanted it behind us. And I think if we can tone down the divisiveness in our communities, I did not want the entire session to have that type of divisive feeling through it. So that was the thought pattern behind it.
Thank you, and thank you all for that. Let's move on. Let's talk about taxes. I want to read one paragraph here so I get it correct. Legislative fiscal analysts estimate over 1.1 million Utahns will see tax savings. I should preface this, you made return money to taxpayers and did different things with taxes. So the analysts estimate 1.1 million Utahns will see tax savings of about $129 on average during the 2022 tax year. The expanded Social Security tax credit could result in an average yearly savings of $210 for about 71,000 Utahns, while the non-refundable state earned income tax credit, which many have spoken of, may give an average of about $194 back to about 81,000 Utahns, according to the bill's fiscal note. So my question is, you made specific moves on taxes that I'd like you each to speak about, but given that gas prices are soaring and now over $4 a gallon, President Biden, as we were walking in here, he's expected to cut off any kind of oil from Russia. We're in a different time. When the session started to now, it's remarkable how the world's changed. But have you done enough to help the average Utahn? Should we or could we have done more in this space? Or there's another perspective, and this is complicated, where they say you shouldn't have done this at all, taking that $150 million, if you're only giving $100 back to a family, let's go solve homelessness or let's go solve somewhere else. So this is a pretty open question, but I'd like you to respond to taxes. And maybe we can start with Senator Davis. So I switch this up a bit.
Thank you. I actually spoke against the tax cut on the floor. And the reason being that I thought we should be spending that money in making sure that people had a decent wage in the state of Utah. That money would be better served in the classroom to help public education. And when you take a look at the percentage of the billion that we spent and the tax cut of what that is, we have to remember going forward, we aren't going to have this kind of money in the future. And one of the most difficult things we can do as a legislative body is raise taxes. And have we set ourselves up, that's another question, have we set ourselves up into the future to have to raise taxes to be able to maintain the status that we have at the current time? So I think it was a nice little gesture on the part of the legislature to give families $100. But at the same time, that's $100 divided by 12, by the way. So there's, and if you're getting paid twice a week, it's divided by 24. So that's the actual amount that you see as an increase on your paycheck, which isn't even enough to buy a gallon of gas these days.
Speaker Wilson, did it do a little more than that from your perspective?
As much as I respect and admire the good senator to my left, the sentiment behind what was just said, I find very troubling. And I'll tell you why. You talked about the numbers, Doug, and when you talk about a couple that's on Social Security, by the time they have the income tax reduction and the Social Security benefit, it's hundreds of dollars a year that they're benefiting from. And one of the things and that makes a difference for a lot of our seniors on fixed incomes. You take that same principle to a family that qualifies for the earned income tax credit. By the time they get that benefit and the income tax benefit, it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars more that they get to keep in their pocket. And one of the things that frustrates me at the Capitol is when lawmakers act like it's their money. This is not lawmakers' money. This is the money of the people of Utah that they send to us to decide how to invest and what we should spend it on. And the principle behind the tax cut last year, which was $80 million, and this year, which was about $200 million, is maybe we should make Utah a little bit more affordable for Utahns and take less of their money and decide how we should spend it. And so you add those 2 years of tax cuts, and I think if President Adams and I have our way, we'd like to cut taxes again next year, a little bit, in a way that's responsible and sustainable. We don't want to cut taxes in a way that we're going to have to come back and increase taxes again. But this is not lawmakers' money. It's not the government's money. It's the people of Utah's money. And so we want them to choose how to spend it, and we want to make life a little bit easier on them. And lastly, I'll say there are always needs in government. You mentioned that there's all these other programs that we could put that money in. We did the best we could to balance all the needs across the state, but I will never apologize for letting Utahns keep a little bit more of their own money, especially in a time when inflation around the country is 7%, and in the Mountain West region, it's over 9%. It's their money to choose how to spend.
Senator Adams?
You know, Doug, what's been said here is, it's just very, very articulate of what we experience. Some people say we haven't cut enough. We need to cut more. Let's cut some more. Other people say, well, you shouldn't have cut anything. That's just where we're at. That's just the rhetoric we hear. And we have to decide what to do. And when you look back a year, you combine the tax cut last year focused on replacing the individual exemption for big families. It took away part of the Social Security tax, and it took away the military retirement, tax on military retirement. This year, the majority of it was income tax with an earned income tax credit, and raised the Social Security up quite a bit. We're trying to balance these tax cuts, and when you take any one individual part of it, you can find fault. But when you look at the overall policy of what we're doing, and I've said it many times, 2021 was a year of a tax cut, 2022 is a year of a tax cut, and the Speaker said it very well. I hope 2023 is a year of a tax cut. But we want to measure twice, and we want to cut once. These are small strategic tax cuts that are able to give money back to families and to be able to help our economy. Arizona had the same income tax rate that we did, 5%. They cut their income tax to 2%. I'm seeing people who are fairly wealthy. One individual I can think of lives in northern Utah. He now lives in Wyoming. Wyoming doesn't have an income tax. We need to look at our tax policy. Tax policy drives the economy. The 10 states that don't have an income tax, you look at their growth compared to those that have high income taxes, and the economic prosperity of those states is grossly different, extremely different. And we need tax policy it's more than just giving, it is strategic as to what taxes drive what part of the economy. And we do a very good job in Utah, and we need to continue to do a very good job in Utah. But anyway, I think we got it right, and I think we could have done more, obviously. And I think we probably could have done less, but I think we're trying to balance it, and I think we did that.
Mm-hmm. Representative King, your perspective?
Thank you. Well, I do believe it is the people's money, and I believe that we should listen to the people in terms of what they would like us to do with it. I didn't see or hear any overwhelming or any significant, for that degree, feeling from my constituents or anyone else among the people of the state of Utah who were emailing me or contacting me, saying they wanted tax cuts. I don't see it now. I think we ought to listen carefully to the fact that people want to see more resources provided to strengthen our public education system, to strengthen resources available for individuals to have affordable housing. to strengthen the needs, to address the needs of people who are really struggling to make ends meet. You ask about the average Utah, Doug. I think that's an important qualifier. The average Utah family is right around $60,000 to $70,000 a year. We made and correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be wrong, but I don't think that we made any meaningful attempt to take the tax cuts that we put in place and target individuals who mitigate the amount of money that individuals who are on the very upper end of the income spectrum from receiving just the full percentage break that people on the lower end of the spectrum got. Now, it's true that the income tax bill did a couple of really good things that have been referred to before. One is putting in place a non-refundable earned income tax credit. That's something that I think is tremendous in terms of addressing needs of the lowest of the working poor and the lowest income folks. It's something, in fact, that I've run as a bill myself in years past. This is something Democrats have talked about for a long time. I think it's also generally a good thing to provide tax relief for individuals in terms of their Social Security income. I have some qualms about the fact that individual households making $200,000 a year got the same tax relief as individual households making $50,000 a year. I don't think that's right. And that's my concern, is that we make no effort at the Utah State Legislature when we cut the income tax rate from 4.95 to 4.85 to target that relief and not provide that large income tax cut, and it is a large income tax cut, for someone making $200,000 or $300,000 a year. Those individuals don't need, and in my experience, don't want the income tax cut. They would rather have that money allocated toward pressing needs in the state of Utah, whether it's clean air, whether it's water, funding to retain the health of the Great Salt Lake, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's education, all sorts of things. So why can't we put in place a better system of making sure that tax relief that we provide is targeted to those people that need it the most, and that we don't give tax relief to people who are making, as a household, $200,000 a year, for example, and more, and saying, you get that same tax relief. To President Adams' point, it is true that there are folks up in Wyoming or Nevada who have no state income tax, and there are a few people who live in Utah or could live in Utah who say, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to have my residence in Wyoming or Nevada because of the tax relief that I get from having no income tax. You know what I say about those folks? Go to those states, because I don't want that attitude in the state of Utah, in the residents here. I want someone who is more willing to say, it's not about me and every last dollar I can get. An individual who makes the choice to move to Utah or to move to Nevada or Wyoming because of no income tax, that individual is not hurting. They're in a position to make a decision that is in their own economic interests, above and beyond the interests of their neighbors and the quality of life that they have in the people here in the state of Utah. And I don't want them here, quite honestly.
Doug, can I just mention a couple of things we did also that I think will help make life a little bit more affordable for Utahns?
Yes, can I say one thing?
You bet.
One of the number one requests, or the thing people that we see at the Deseret News, right now it's gas prices and inflation have risen to the top.
Yeah.
So just in context of this conversation, obviously there are different points of view, but yes, Speaker, go ahead and then we'll...
Just a couple of other quick things we did that I think are going to help with what you just described, actually, how expensive it is. Representative King already talked about a significant amount of additional money we put into making housing more affordable, especially for those on the lower income scale. We also passed, I think, an important piece of legislation that should make it much easier to get affordable child care in the state. And a lot of our residents right now are having a hard time finding child care, let alone affordable child care. And so, and lastly, we talked a little bit about what we did for state employees. I mean, we do as a state legislature have a responsibility to take care of our employees. And we gave, on average, about a 6% raise for state employees, but there were some other areas that, let me say it differently, about 6% increase for employee compensation. How the different departments allocate that might be different in each department. But there were a few other areas that we felt like we needed to do even more. Corrections and Department of Public Safety and some of our social service providers saw some additional funding on top of that to try to help make life a little bit more affordable in Utah for them. So there's some other things we did besides tax relief that will help Utahns.
Okay. Any response? Any follow-up?
Well, yeah, I didn't necessarily need to have a follow-up, but I thought maybe the next question may be on energy policy. I'd like to speak to that. But before we leave that, I'd just say that, I probably have a different opinion. As we gave significant child care dependent exemption tax cuts last year. We gave Social Security both this year and last year. We took care of military retirement. So we have targeted the cuts, and I think to do a broad-based income tax cut that affects everyone, just not those particular groups, is not a bad balance. And when you look at all the tax cuts together, we have balanced it. But maybe I just, when you talk about inflation, I believe, and I'm old enough to remember the term oil embargo. Many of the students listening to this probably don't know what I'm talking about. But in the 1980s, we had very high gas prices. Gas prices went from 50 cents a gallon to $1.50. Interest rates followed those when they went from 10% to 20%. We had the worst, economic downturn in the history of our country. I'm very concerned with energy prices. And what I'm concerned about energy prices is I believe we have an energy policy, and much of that's driven by the national and federal government on a regulatory basis. A few years ago, we were totally energy independent. Now, for whatever reason, we've stopped energy fossil fuel exploration. And we're gonna make a move to renewables. We see every car dealership or every car maker on the planet moving to electric vehicles. We're gonna make that move, but we shouldn't make that move at the expense of high gas prices today on families. And we need to push back. We're at eastern Utah, the Vernal area. We have enough gas there to drive gas prices, enough oil there to drive gas prices down. But the regulatory policies that they're having to go through to find that the oil is basically embarrassing. That as a nation, we have a war going on in Ukraine. We ought to be shipping natural gas to Germany. They've shut off the North Shore pipeline. We have, our energy policy is something that we need to look at. And it's a federal issue, but I think it's something locally that we need to be aware of.
Let me go in. We have about 10 minutes, and there's a lot we can do. I have obviously personal media interest in transparency and getting public records. There was great content on that. But I do think I want to go to another principle. Okay. And that's the principle in the final hours of the legislative session, HB 11 was modified and changed, and it caused a great uproar. The governor says he's going to veto it. But it began as legislation to create a commission to consider how best to deal with transgender athletes. Some lawmakers had worked 1.5 years trying to get information, trying to see what needs to be done. But then it was changed to be a ban on transgender athletes, and it was done without debate. There were no transgender athletes, no female athletes, no parents, no one up there to put a position forward. So I'm going to ask this a little provocatively, and you can challenge me, but isn't that the definition of bad government, when something is approved in that fashion? And Speaker, it was a House bill. Would you like to speak to it first?
I'm happy to, Doug. So Representative Birkeland, she's a lawmaker from Morgan County, and she's got a vested interest in this. She spends a lot of her free time coaching women's sports and also reffing men's and women's sports. And her original intent with this bill, and I think even through its passage, was to actually protect women's sports and to ensure that the girls in particular in our state that are participating in soccer or track or swimming or other sports have a competitive environment that they feel like can be fair. And we have seen around the country instances where they become unfair. And so she was trying to protect women's sports in that regard. And I can't speak to some of the specifics of exactly how the bill progressed through the Senate, but at a high level, what I can say is that we've been trying to work on that issue for two years. And all the different stakeholders have been part of the conversations for those 18 plus months. But a decision was made towards the end of the session to have a bill in place that, and I'll let President Adams speak to it to some extent, but to have a bill in place that creates a commission And that commission will make a determination whether or not a trans athlete can be competitive. And that commission kicks into place in the event that either there is the law we pass is overturned or has a stay put on it, or we get some clarity at a national level from federal courts what this looks like. And so I think that we'll see how this progresses with the governor. We saw what he said, and that is part of the process. And so if the governor vetoes it, we will poll our members to see if there's interest in having a veto override session. And it's way too early to predict what will happen with regard to that. But we'll keep working on that one way or the other.
A lot of the public felt like they were cut out of that process, which is why I tried to characterize it good government versus bad government. Would you have preferred that happen a different way? And Senator Adams, maybe I can go to you.
And maybe obviously you have different opinions, but I actually believe it's actually good government. Let me explain why. I come up with a lot of good ideas, I think. I think all my ideas are good ideas. but when I actually have 103 other legislators look at them, other people look at them, they usually get refined, and my good ideas sometimes aren't that good, or they get better. So let me explain what happened with this bill. We've been working on this issue for several years. Idaho actually did an outright ban, and Idaho's outright ban has been enjoined. There's been 10 other states, I think 11. I think one other state just passed one. Wyoming just passed it a few weeks ago, and I think another state passed it last week. So the ban is pretty much being passed around the United States. I personally don't believe a ban is going to be upheld. So I basically looked at Representative Birkeland's bill, and we got some really significant good input from attorneys all over the nation. I think some of the best attorneys in this issue that I know. And they recommended this commission, and the commission is not going to decide who participates in women's sports, but the commission has to set up the metrics, the data, to show the bell curve of what a normal women's sports participant would have, the qualities and the physical attributes to be able to participate with. And then they would look to see if the trans athlete fit within that norm, so that there wasn't an unfair competitive advantage. It was data-driven, not politically driven. And I helped and was very, very involved in trying to put together the conversations about the commission. There was some buy-in by the community, but still, the question was that there was a big outcry saying that why are you moving directly to the commission, because the ban is going to be upheld. Well, quite honestly, I don't believe the ban will be upheld. And so when you have a good idea and you have to find a way to get a bill to pass, and I believe in the commission, this bill simply says that if a ban is not upheld by a court, and I personally don't believe it'll be upheld, what will we have in Utah? We'll have a commission. And so I actually liked an idea of passing the commission and saying if a ban were ever upheld, that we'd move to a ban. But to do nothing, what do we have? We walk out of the session, we were at the last day of the session, if we didn't have anything, we wouldn't have any resolve to it. The commission wouldn't be in place. We'd be in the same spot that we'd be as if we'd done nothing. We're doing nothing. Idaho is in that spot now with the stay. I think Utah should have done something, and we did do something, and I actually believe the commission will survive if the governor doesn't veto it, and I believe what I want is a commission.
Senator King, can you give a minute response?
Sure. I think that you're right, Doug, the process was bad. It happened in the last 4 hours of the session. The case, or the bill after it was amended in the Senate, came over to the House. We could and should in the House have just circled it, refused to hear it. I wish that had happened. It went through, however, and I think the problem with the idea of a commission is we didn't set up the commission first and foremost, we set up a ban. And there's not going to be a commission until and unless the ban is overturned. So what we should have done is set up the commission initially to look at it, have people who really know a lot more about this than any legislator give us their best opinion, put together a recommendation from a commission that's based on medical and public health issues and issues that focus on the process of transgendering and what that means, what impact it has on athletic performance, things like that. What we got instead was a culture war bill that was extraordinarily divisive and extraordinarily hurtful to a very vulnerable and marginalized population.
Senator Davis, a quick response.
You know, it did come out of the blue, so to speak. It was kind of blindsided by this whole thing. We had 11. I was on the committee that it was discussed in, brought forward, circled on the board for 4 or 5 days, it seems like, maybe 2 weeks. It was on the board circled. And then in the last minute, it came out when we were really moving towards a conclusion of the legislature. And I thought things were moving fairly smooth, the bills that we were looking at. And when 11 was uncircled and then substituted, I asked for time to be able to look at the bill, be able to do it, and we were not successful in circling the bill while the minority party had a chance to take a look at the bill and look at the ramifications. We ended up spending, I think, about an hour, over an hour of time on the floor debating this, debating what, and I come away saying, why did we even deal with this issue? There's a lot of good bills that were not dealt with that were on the board because of this debate. And I look at this issue, it affects 4 transgender children in the state of Utah right now. Could there be more? Probably. Science is continually looking at this issue. We continue as a community to understand sexual orientation differently than we have in our past generations. As science comes forward and we understand better how to deal with our fellow person, looking at children and making sure that they have an inclusive, growing environment to learn in, to play in, to understand what life's about. I think we take a lot of children away from doing the severe act of suicide. These are things we need not in the legislature until it comes to a conclusion that we can figure out what we're doing and move forward on it. Banning is not the answer. To ban anything is really, it's discrimination in its worst form when you ban certain people from being able to engage in certain activities. It's understanding the human life, what humanity is really truly about. And I think we missed that boat. And we missed being able to deal with a lot of other issues that probably would have helped the state more.
Let me thank our panel. We're out of time, but could you each give a 30-second response, just a summary of what keeps you up at night? Can you do that in 30 seconds? What keeps you up at night? Representative Kane?
The health of the Great Salt Lake keeps me up at night.
Okay.
If we don't have that body of water healthy in the future, we got problems, and I give credit to my colleague, Speaker Wilson, because he's spearheading efforts to address that, and I appreciate that very much.
Inflation, our current energy policy, our current fiscal policy that's federally driven.
Speaker?
In addition to those two things, I would just say our overall strategy as a state to manage growth and to keep quality of life for Utahns where we want it and where we expect it.
And Senator Davis?
I think the one thing I agree with my colleagues. I think the Great Salt Lake, the viability of the Great Salt Lake, making sure that it's healthy. We know that if that lake dries, this whole Wasatch Front dies along with the lake. And I think as we take a look and try to do that, I'm really encouraged at the fact that we didn't do an authority over the top of it and just kind of make sure that we do good science and find ways to make that happen.
So thank you. We end on a point of agreement. Very wonderful that you were here today. I think it was very informative. Our thanks to the Kempsey Gardner Center and to all of you for joining us. And on behalf of the Deseret News and UtahPolicy.com, please sign up for the newsletter. Please come to our website. If you don't have a paper, I can bring it to you personally every day, so whatever you need to do. So thank you so
Are you
much.
printing every day?